Everybody say hi again. Round 2.
Hi.
Okay, let me make sure it's actually recording this time. Okay. Everyone ready?
Hi.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tatiana Toro, and tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about graffiti and why it should be considered a form of art. Now, while I've never actually done any graffiti of my own, my travels and my lifestyle have led me to see plenty of different paintings and murals that have been considered graffiti. In this day and time, people grow more confident in themselves and their forms of self-expression, as well as using graffiti for political and social movements or saying things that need to be said without actually verbally saying them. When you think of graffiti, I'm sure the first thing coming to mind is cuss words or inappropriate images spray painted onto a brick wall. For those who live in bigger cities or areas where graffiti is more common, you might be aware that graffiti can come in a variety of forms. It's not always hateful text or something that should be covered up, but sometimes it's beautiful. It's inspirational. It's artwork that makes you stop and turn and say, wow, whoever did that's talented. I believe graffiti falls under the expectations of art and fits perfectly with its many definitions. In my speech, I'm going to describe art in its many forms. Next, I'll educate you on graffiti itself. And finally, I'll discuss the idea of graffiti being vandalism, but why it's actually not. Now that I've introduced myself and my topic, I'm going to begin by describing what art truly is. Art can come in many different forms, shapes, and sizes. When we think of artists, we don't always think about the same person. We might be thinking about artistic in aspects like painting, drawing, sketching, sculpting, or using scrap materials to piece together to make something beautiful. Musical artists who sing, play an instrument, or even those behind the scenes who help produce music. Or we could think of those who are talented with their bodies in the form of gymnastics, dancing, things involving strength. Or we could even think of people in the kitchen, such as chefs, bakers, etc. Overall, art isn't a black and white idea that's shown physically. Rather, we can reach all 5 of our senses. While art's commonly seen, and we get to view it with our eyes and make our own assumptions or interpretations, you can hear it, you can taste it, you can feel it, or you can smell it. If art has so many forms and has such a strong diversity, then why would graffiti be considered any less? After all, as mentioned in Michaela Bratton's article titled Journal Writing Project, Is Graffiti Art or Vandalism? A spray can is just a tool for artwork, just as a paintbrush or a canvas or a musical instrument. Now that I've introduced you to the multitude of art forms, I'm going to educate you on graffiti, its origin, where it is today, and why it should be considered an art form. Graffiti is simply put as a form of visual communication, usually illegal, involving the unauthorized marking of a public space by an individual or group. According to Britannica's article by Glenn D. Curry, while the definition brings the point of graffiti usually being illegal, Curry's article goes on to mention that graffiti might be a form of attention-seeking or gang-related activity, but it can also very commonly be understood as an expressive art form. Graffiti originates from the Italian word known as graffio, which means scratch, and the word graffiti meaning incised inscriptions. The idea of graffiti dates to at least the 16th century, where markings were found on rocks in Central America and medieval English churches. Graffiti in the US and Europe was commonly used for gang purposes during the 20th century, and they were used to identify or claim territory, memorialize dead gang members, boast about criminal acts, or challenge other gangs in a non-direct or violent way. Common graffiti targets were subways, billboards, buildings, and graffiti to this day ranges in different areas, as stated in Ray Barak's of the Temple News article titled Graffiti's Art, Not Vandalism. Barak talks about the polished sidewalks and pristine buildings in his hometown of New Jersey. He proceeds to mention that he was drawn to Philadelphia because of the elaborate street art and graffiti-filled alleyways or splashes of color that never failed to impress him all around. Being a resident in Las Vegas, we aren't necessarily known for street art, but it isn't uncommon to find a mural or paintings on our buildings that are either just impressively creative or mean something about our society. The enthusiasm and personality that graffiti brings to a society is exactly what makes it so important and a significant art form. Barak describes graffiti as being able to convey a raw, uncensored message, and leaving graffiti to the discretion of the artist is what causes it to be so beautiful and uninhibited. Now that you know more about graffiti, I'm going to talk about why some consider it vandalism and why it shouldn't always be viewed that way. Graffiti has a variety of factors and ways of viewing it as an art form. However, not everyone clearly agrees. Gina Ernstings of The Collegian, in her article titled Graffiti Should Not Be Considered Art, makes strong points for graffiti being a form of vandalism. Ernstine makes the point that graffiti has a high cost to the perpetrator and the community in terms of money and illegality. She finds graffiti to deface and degrade the private and public properties, and the cleanup of graffiti can be costly. She goes on to say that graffiti is the most common form of property vandalism, yet only repeated offenders face jail time because it doesn't fit in the budget for everyone who commits graffiti to face jail time. Ironically enough, though, when you search up the term vandalism, some of the first pictures that come up, this being one of them, is indeed a picture of graffiti. Can everybody see that? Awesome. Thank you guys for the thumbs up. Courtney Schuna's Graffiti is an Art Form article successfully rebuttals against the idea of graffiti truly being a form of vandalism. While graffiti is the defacing or vandalizing of property, it's a great form of self-expression, and there have been many projects that have actually openly allowed graffiti to happen on their walls. However, there are times when graffiti does get over the top or becomes unacceptable or considered disrespectful. Courtney Schuna makes the point that artists should have an outlet of graffiti to use as an art form, but it should be limited to specific and acceptable context and location. The supposed 4 motivating factors that are considered to be bad for graffiti seem to be fame, rebellion, self-expression, and power. Although these seem to have a more negative context around them, I find them to be more positive and influential. Fame is something that so many people want and hope for, but there are many ways to get it. When you think of fame in terms of graffiti, I see it as a way to get noticed for artistic ability. Many artists get famous and recognized for their artworks, their music, their creativity, but it's rare to get noticed from graffiti because it's often under a street name or just anonymous overall. This is due to the fact that most people who do commit graffiti could get in trouble if they have their name out there for it. Rebellion, while could be interpreted badly, can also be rebelling against social norms or societal issues that hold our society back and can be a form of expressing something that needs to be said, but so many people are afraid to say. Self-expression is pretty self-explanatory for why it might be a good thing, because when someone can express their emotions when they have nowhere else to go, or those who see the artwork can openly be suffering along with whatever the artwork was, and they find someone who can bond with them over it. Finally, a motivator would be power, which I find hard to take as a negative because gaining power for graffiti is difficult. Like I said, it would be anonymous or under a street name, so they wouldn't be directly gaining power. However, graffiti can give a silent power to someone or a voice to someone influential who can speak for the group or society. Now that I've explained the rebuttal of graffiti being a form of vandalism when it is an art form. Are you guys muted? Okay. In conclusion, graffiti has had quite an origin story and come a long way, as well as the people who take part in it. It is viewed in many different lights, but overall should be considered as an art form. In my speech, I explained the real meaning of art and how art can range from being artistic to a musician and ultimately be someone who takes part in graffiti. Next, I explained graffiti and how it's been around since the 16th century. Finally, I described why graffiti could be interpreted as vandalism, but the motives that explain graffiti and are portrayed as bad should be viewed as rather positive. Overall, graffiti is something that takes just as much creativity, imagination, and bravery as any other form of art, and therefore shouldn't be considered any less. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Good job, Tati.